The river flows quietly now, the frantic splashing of hooves and the metallic clang of iron long faded into a profound stillness that feels even more substantial than the clamor of the battle itself. It is July in the year 711 AD, on the muddy banks of the Guadalete River in the deep south of Spain, where the water is slowly, inexorably, cleansing away the remnants of a kingdom that has just abruptly ceased to exist. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine yourself standing on that marshy bank. The air hangs heavy, thick with the humidity of the wetlands and the coppery tang of recent bloodshed. Yet, the overriding sensation isn't one of raw violence, but rather an unsettling, confusing void. A solitary horse stands near the water's edge, its coat matted with mud, its ragged breathing disturbingly loud in the pervasive silence. This is Aurelia, a magnificent white stallion, a creature bred for royalty, still bearing a saddle encrusted with precious gems that now catch only the last, dying rays of the setting sun. But the saddle is conspicuously empty. We gaze down into the sucking mud of the riverbank, where the reeds sway gently in the gathering evening breeze, utterly indifferent to the monumental catastrophe that has just irrevocably altered the course of world history. There is no one here. No king lies broken upon his shield, no final dramatic tableau of a monarch uttering his last words to a faithful servant. There is only a pair of golden boots. These are heavy ceremonial boots, intricately woven with gold thread and studded with pearls and rubies, slowly sinking deeper into the soft silt. One lies on its side, half submerged, while the other stands eerily upright, as if the man who wore them had simply stepped out of his earthly existence and vanished into the ethereal air. These are the boots of Roderick, the last king of the Visigoths, and they remain the sole, poignant proof that he was ever present here at all. The heavy silence that blankets this field is the silence of an empire awakening to the stunning realization that it has been orphaned. Before you settle in too deeply, please consider taking a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you genuinely find value and enjoyment in what I create here. Also, let me know your city and local time in the comments below, so we can see where our audience is tuning in from around the globe. Now, allow the everyday noise of your own day to recede as we fix our gaze upon those abandoned golden boots. They embody the ultimate enigma of this tale, a vanishing act that historians continue to passionately debate even today. Did King Roderick perhaps drown in the powerful currents of the river, dragged down by his ornate armor, his body swept out into the vast Atlantic to be lost forever in its depths? Or did he, as some ancient legends whisper, shed his royal identity in a moment of profound shame, casting off his golden boots like a snake sheds its skin, only to flee into the rugged mountains of Portugal and live out his days as a nameless hermit, doing penance for the catastrophic fall of Spain? The definitive truth has been swallowed by the mud of history, but the profound consequence is undeniably clear. The king is gone. His army is scattered to the winds. The mighty Visigothic kingdom, which had governed Hispania for nearly 3 centuries since the demise of Rome, has utterly evaporated in the course of a single afternoon. To truly grasp the immense gravity of this silence, we must comprehend that this was far more than just a mere defeat. It was a complete disintegration. The soldiers who fled this battlefield did not retreat with any hope of regrouping. They ran because there was absolutely nothing left for them to fight for. The very structure of their society hadn't been conquered from external forces so much as it had simply ceased to function from within. It marks a moment of dizzying historical vertigo, where the established map of Europe is being dramatically redrawn in real time, yet the fresh ink has not yet fully dried. As the sun slowly dips below the horizon, casting long, bruised purple shadows across the tranquil river valley, we can almost sense the lingering ghost of the old world making its final departure. The Visigoths, once the formidable inheritors of Rome, those barbarians who had gradually become the entrenched establishment, wore Roman robes, spoke a dialect of Latin, and worshipped in grand stone basilicas. They firmly believed their rule was divinely ordained by God and solidified by the passage of time. But as we contemplate those empty boots, we are confronted with the stark fragility of power. We witness how swiftly a proud dynasty can be reduced to a mere relic abandoned in the dirt. The chroniclers who would later document this fateful day described it not as a murder, but rather as a suicide. They spoke of the suicide of a kingdom, a phrase that powerfully implies a slow, deliberate process of self-destruction rather than a sudden, external victimization. Indeed, the silence by the river is precisely the silence of a once grand house that has utterly collapsed under its own immense weight. The wind that rustles through the willow trees seems to whisper that this tragic end was always inevitable, its fate inscribed in the stars long before the very first arrow was ever fired. We find ourselves standing amidst the grim wreckage of a brutal civil war that had bled the country dry, leaving it hollowed out, fractured, and brittle. The empty saddle of Aurelia, the magnificent horse, serves as a poignant testament to a throne that was never truly secure. Roderick was a usurper, a man who had seized power in a chaotic vacuum, hated by fully half of his own subjects, and viewed with deep suspicion by his own generals. When he rode into this decisive battle, he was leading men who secretly yearned for his downfall, men who looked across the battlefield not at their enemies, but at potential liberators. This, then, is the profound and tragic irony of the scene. The golden boots were abandoned not because the enemy was overwhelmingly strong, but because the very foundation of the kingdom was fatally weak. As night fully descends upon the Guadalete, the frogs begin their rhythmic croaking, an earthy, grounding sound that pulls us back to the physical reality of the marsh. The grand narrative of history momentarily pauses here. There are no heroes yet, only lingering ghosts. The 300 Spartans had their iconic, hot gates. The Visigoths have only this quiet, muddy bank and a missing king. It is a humble, humiliating end, to be sure, but it is also, paradoxically, a beginning. For in the utter chaos of this collapse, amidst the thousands of fleeing soldiers and terrified nobles scrambling for the relative safety of the northern hills, there are resilient survivors who will defiantly refuse to accept that this is truly the end. The story we are about to unfold does not belong to the man who once wore these golden boots. It belongs instead to those who kept their boots firmly on, to those who did not vanish, but instead climbed higher into the mist and the stone, resolute in their decision to wait. But here, by the tranquil water, the era of the Goths is definitively over. The loss of Spain, as it will be sorrowfully recounted in the Lamentations of the chroniclers, is absolute. The darkness settles in, cool and absolute, wrapping the ravaged land in a somber shroud. We depart from the river bank now, drifting away from the empty armor and the grazing horse, moving backward through time to truly understand how this fatal rot first took hold. We must comprehend the sickness before we can possibly grasp the cure. We must perceive the depth of the betrayal before we can fully appreciate the unwavering loyalty yet to come. The camera of our minds slowly pulls back, leaving the golden boots to continue their silent descent into the vast history of the earth. As we turn our gaze toward the opulent palaces of Toledo, 1 year earlier, where the kingdom's self-destruction truly commenced, the air within the palace is far from fresh like the river breeze. Instead, it is stale, heavy with the scent of cloying perfume and pervasive conspiracy. The grand stone walls echo not with the clash of steel, but with the hushed, insidious whispers of plots. It is here, in the year 710 AD, that the insidious seeds of the disaster at Guadalete were first meticulously sown. The kingdom, in essence, was a beautifully rotting fruit, gleaming golden on its exterior, much like Roderick's boots, but utterly black and soft with decay within. The nobility was hopelessly fractured. The common people were grievously overtaxed and utterly exhausted, and the crown itself had become a coveted prize to be ruthlessly stolen rather than a sacred burden to be honorably borne. We drift through the labyrinthine corridors of this doomed court, observing the faces of men who would readily sell their country for a fleeting, momentary advantage. We see the corrosive envy in their eyes, the insatiable greed in their grasping hands. It is a tragedy of truly Shakespearean proportions, playing itself out across the sun-drenched Iberian Peninsula. And as we silently watch the intricate political maneuvering that would inexorably lead to the muddy banks of the Guadalete, we realize that the invasion from the south was merely the final, decisive push that ultimately toppled a structure already precariously leaning over the precipice of ruin. The silence of the aftermath, then, is simply the silence of inevitability. The night is deep now. The myriad stars above Spain look down upon a land in tumultuous transition, utterly indifferent to the ephemeral names of kings or caliphs. The golden boots have long since disappeared beneath the mud's surface. The water flows on, ceaselessly, cleansing the land, and preparing the stage for the dramatic next act. A new wind is beginning to blow from the south, warm and carrying the exotic scent of spices and sand, a powerful wind that will fundamentally change everything. But in the distant north, the ancient mountains are patiently waiting. They are old, enduring, and utterly unforgiving. They have witnessed countless empires rise and fall before. And they know, just as the river knows, that while kings may vanish, the land itself remembers eternally. The story is just waking up. We drift north now, leaving the poignant silence of the riverbank behind, floating over the parched, ochre landscapes of the Iberian Peninsula toward the very heart of the crumbling realm. We arrive at the great city of Toledo, the Regia, the royal city perched majestically high on a granite hill and encircled by the Tahoe River like a formidable stone island in a moving moat. It is the year 710 AD, precisely 1 year before those fateful boots were lost forever in the mud. From the outside, Toledo presents a vision of impregnable strength, a skyline of ancient Roman walls reinforced by ambitious Gothic architecture, its towers seemingly scratching the belly of the sky. But as we pass through the heavy iron gates, moving ghost-like through the echoing stone corridors of the royal palace, the very atmosphere undergoes a chilling transformation. The air here is far from fresh. It is stagnant, heavy with the cloying scent of beeswax candles, aged incense, and the sharp, coppery tang of pervasive fear. To comprehend why this once proud kingdom fell with such astonishing ease, we must scrutinize the crown itself, an object of immense beauty that had, paradoxically, become a burden far too heavy for any single man to bear. The Visigothic kingdom suffered from a peculiar and utterly fatal political ailment, a systemic weakness that the chroniclers of the time aptly termed morbus Gothicus, or the Gothic disease. This wasn't a physical plague of the body, but rather a profound sickness of the state itself. Unlike the monarchies we often envision, where a king dies and his son naturally ascends the throne, the Visigothic crown was, by tradition, elective. Each time a king passed away, the entire realm held its breath. The powerful nobility, a veritable pack of wolves cloaked in silk robes, would gather to choose the next ruler. In doing so, they inadvertently ensured that every succession was a crisis and every coronation was, in essence, a grim prelude to civil war. We now find ourselves in the shadowed alcoves of the throne room in late 710, in the turbulent wake of the death of the previous king, Witiza. The palace, at this juncture, is a veritable nest of vipers. Witiza had left behind several sons, princes who firmly believed the throne was their rightful birthright by blood. However, the powerful council of nobles, ever fearful of a burgeoning dynasty that might curtail their own extensive power, cast their gaze elsewhere. They looked south, toward a hardened duke named Roderick. Roderick was a man forged of iron, a seasoned warrior who promised desperately needed stability in a time of widespread trembling. When he ascended the throne, ruthlessly seizing the crown from the hands of Witiza's rightful children, he didn't merely acquire a title. He ignited a bitter blood feud that would ultimately tear the very map of Europe apart. Imagine the scene of his coronation, the solemn chanting of the bishops, the glittering of the votive crowns, magnificent hoops of gold and hanging letters that the Visigoths traditionally dedicated to the church, swaying gently above the altar. But now, observe the faces in the assembled crowd. Half the room is cheering enthusiastically, while the other half remains ominously silent, their eyes hard and cold with resentment. Witiza's sons and their influential faction, who considered themselves the legitimate heirs, stand in the deep shadows, their hands resting, white-knuckled, on the hilts of their swords. They do not perceive Roderick as their rightful king. They see him as a usurper, a thieving pretender who must be destroyed at any and all costs. This, then, is the insidious rot at the very core of the fruit. The kingdom is not unified against any external threat, it is instead consumed by an internal hatred so profound and deep that men would eventually be willing to burn down their own house just to watch their rivals choke on the acrid smoke. As we drift through these tense, suffocating months leading up to the inevitable invasion, We see Roderick as a king struggling to rule over a fractured, untenable reality. He issues royal edicts, but they are obeyed only with palpable reluctance. He mobilizes his armies, but he constantly glances over his shoulder, plagued by suspicion. The inherent fragility of the state is not confined solely to the palace walls, it has seeped into the very soil of the countryside itself. The Visigoths, for all their impressive architectural splendor, constituted a minority ruling elite, perhaps no more than 200,000 individuals, governing a sprawling population of millions of Hispano-Romans. They were like oil floating atop water, never truly mixing or integrating. And there were others, too, who observed these widening cracks with a desperate, fervent hope for fundamental change. The Jewish population of Hispania, once prosperous and thriving, had been subjected to brutal, escalating persecution in the years leading up to 710. Draconian laws had been enacted to strip them of their property, their cherished faith, and their inherent dignity, effectively transforming a vibrant community into a subjugated class, now praying fervently for deliverance. To them, the Visigothic crown was not a symbol of protection, but a heavy, crushing hammer. The social contract had been irrevocably shredded long before the first enemy's ship ever appeared on the horizon. The ground was meticulously tilled and fertile for an imminent collapse. It merely required a powerful storm to completely wash away the already decaying structure. As Roderick sits upon his throne, clad in the heavy robes of state, he appears as a truly tragic figure, a capable captain who has, regrettably, taken command of a rapidly sinking ship. He spends his days tirelessly suppressing minor rebellions, relentlessly chasing down Basque wolves in the mountainous north. Exhausted by the Sisyphean effort of trying to hold together a tapestry that is visibly unraveling in his very hands, he fails to look south. He fails to observe the narrow strip of water that crucially separates his deeply troubled kingdom from the rapidly ascendant power of the Umayyad Caliphate in North Africa. In his burdened mind, the primary danger resides within the very room he inhabits, in the insidious whispers of the Witiza faction. Historians still engage in vigorous debate over whether Witiza's sons actively dispatched messengers to the Muslims in Africa, explicitly inviting an invasion to aid them in overthrowing Roderick, or if the invasion was a separate, opportunistic event that they merely exploited once it had already begun. Ultimately, the distinction mattered little to the catastrophic outcome. Whether by direct written invitation or by silent complicity, the door was unmistakably unlocked from the inside. The profound tragedy of Spain's suicide is that the very weapon used to kill the kingdom was forged in Toledo, not in distant Damascus. The systemic paralysis of the state meant that when the inevitable crisis finally arrived, there was no unified immune response. There was no rallying cry potent enough to unite the peasant in the field, the merchant in the bustling city, and the noble in the fortified castle, simply because they did not belong to the same world. They were, in essence, strangers living in the same land, bound only by a complex tax code and a pervasive mutual suspicion. As the year 710 slowly bled into 711, the oppressive atmosphere in Toledo grew heavier, much like the air before a violent thunderstorm. The omens were omnipresent, flocks of birds flying erratically, strange lights reported in the northern skies, and unsettling dreams of floods and fire disturbing the restless sleep of the bishops. We observe Roderick pacing the city's ramparts at night, gazing out over the dark, sprawling expanse of the Meseta. He feels the immense weight of the crown pressing relentlessly down on his temples, a headache that never truly fades. He suspects his enemies are plotting, but he cannot possibly fathom the sheer scale of the impending betrayal. He envisions a sudden knife in the dark, a cup of poisoned wine, or perhaps a localized revolt in a distant province. He cannot conceive that his rivals are, in fact, preparing to pull the very pillars of the sky down upon everyone. The rot is total, pervasive. It is embedded in the wood of the throne, the cold stone of the walls, and most damningly, in the hearts of his own generals. The wild donkeys that the Umayyad general would later mock are nowhere to be seen just yet. At this critical moment, the only players on the stage are the titans of the Visigothic aristocracy, locked in a death grip, frantically wrestling for control of the steering wheel while the precipice of the cliff rapidly approaches. The silence of the palace at night is dangerously deceptive. It is not the peace of a well-ordered realm, but rather the held breath of a victim grimly awaiting the inevitable blow. We now leave Toledo, drifting south once more, tracing the invisible threads of conspiracy that stretch from the resentful princes in the capital all the way to the coast. We are moving toward the very edge of the known world, to the Pillars of Hercules, where the mighty Mediterranean merges with the vast Atlantic. Here, the internal rot within the crown perfectly intersects with the opportune moment for a revenger. The annals of history teach us that while a kingdom can slowly perish from 1,000 small cuts, it often requires one specific man, one profoundly heartbroken, vengeful man, to deliver the final, devastating strike. The golden boots of Roderick were ultimately destined for the mud, not solely due to abstract political machinations, but because of the raw, consuming rage of a father. As the sun rises over the southern coast, illuminating the white caps of the strait, we behold the fortress of Ceuta standing isolated, a solitary sentinel diligently watching the sea. Inside, a man named Julian resides. He is a count, a powerful governor, a crucial gatekeeper, and he is currently reading a letter that will unequivocally end the world as he knows it. The ink on the parchment is dry, but the words themselves burn with an infernal fire. The wind picks up, howling fiercely through the straits, carrying the salty spray of an ocean that is on the verge of becoming a major highway for history. The crown in Toledo is heavy with its internal rot, but the critical key to the gate of Europe rests firmly in Julian's hand, and he is about to turn it. The silence of the night is now shattered by the thunderous sound of waves crashing against the rugged rock, a relentless rhythm of destruction and creation that seems to have no end. We stand now at the very edge of the map, on the southern side of the narrow strip of water that separates the continents. Looking north from the fortress of Ceuta, the wind here is ceaseless, screaming through the legendary Pillars of Hercules, stripping the moisture from your skin and filling your mouth with the gritty taste of salt and ancient dust. It is late in the year 710 AD, and the man standing on the battlements, staring across the 9 miles of churning blue ocean toward the distant coast of Spain, is Count Julian. In the chronicles of the West, he is forever cast as the villain, the treacherous Judas of the Visigoths. But here, in the quiet solitude of the ramparts, he is simply a father consumed by a grief that has metastasized into cold, unyielding hatred. Ceuta is a strange, liminal place, a fortress tenaciously clinging to the African coast. Technically, it remains loyal to the Visigothic crown in Toledo, yet it is entirely surrounded by the rapidly expanding tide of the Umayyad Caliphate. Julian is, in essence, the gatekeeper of Europe. For many years, he has kept his door firmly shut, diligently repelling raids and maintaining a delicate, precarious balance of power. But now, the lock has been definitively broken, not by an enemy battering ram, but by a chilling letter from afar. The story, whispered for centuries and passed down through ballads and fireside tales, recounts the fate of Julian's daughter, Florinda, famously known to history as La Cava. She had been sent across the water to the royal court in Toledo, a common practice for children of the nobility to be educated in the refined etiquette of queens and to secure a husband worthy of her elevated station. Julian had entrusted his most precious treasure to his king. But King Roderick, intoxicated by his newfound power and perhaps deluding himself that the laws of decency did not apply to a man who wore the crown, brutally betrayed that trust. The legends diverge on the precise details. Some recount him spying on her bathing in the Tahoe River, while others speak of a more violent and direct assault within the hallowed palace walls. Regardless of the specifics, the result was a secret message sent back to Ceuta. Some versions claim Florinda sent her father a rotten egg wrapped in silk, a stark symbol that the purity he treasured had been utterly defiled. Others suggest it was a simple, tear-stained letter vividly detailing her dishonor. Whatever the medium, the devastating message shattered Julian's loyalty beyond repair. The man who now gazed across the strait was no longer a governor protecting his realm. He was a desperate predator searching for a weapon immense enough to kill a king. And that very weapon awaited him directly behind his fortress, in the formidable person of the Umayyad governor, Musa ibn Nusayr. To fully grasp the magnitude of what transpired next, we must recognize that the Umayyads, despite all their impressive prowess on land, were not yet undisputed masters of the sea in this particular region. The Strait of Gibraltar presented a formidable barrier, a treacherous, swift current that protected Spain more effectively than any physical wall. Musa ibn Nusayr and his brilliant lieutenant, Tariq ibn Ziyad, eyed the verdant hills of Andalusia with an intense hunger, but they conspicuously lacked the logistical means to transport an entire army across the water without facing certain interception. They urgently needed a bridge. Julian became that bridge. In a series of clandestine meetings that undoubtedly rank among the most consequential conversations in all of human history, the Christian governor approached the Muslim commander. Imagine the scene: flickering oil lamps casting long shadows in a tent in North Africa, the palpable tension of two vastly different worlds colliding not in open battle, but in a calculated business deal. Julian didn't merely offer safe passage, he offered the complete logistics of an apocalypse. He provided invaluable intelligence regarding Roderick's vulnerabilities, detailed maps of the southern coast, and most crucially, the necessary ships. He even offered his own merchant fleet to ferry the invaders across, cleverly masquerading them as innocent trade vessels so as not to alert the vigilant coastal watchtowers. It was a deal forged entirely from pure, unadulterated spite, a father willing to burn down his entire world to avenge his beloved daughter. However, history is seldom as straightforward as a simplistic fairy tale of revenge. Historians continue to debate whether Julian was, in fact, a Visigoth at all, or perhaps the last Byzantine exarch of Africa, a Roman functionary cut off from Constantinople who allied with the Arabs purely for survival, with the story of Florinda being a later, romanticized invention designed to explain a far more complex geopolitical shift. Yet, the enduring persistence of the Florinda story strongly suggests a deep kernel of emotional truth. Whether motivated by the heartfelt tears of a wronged daughter or the cold, hard calculus of survival, Julian definitively handed the keys of Europe to Tariq ibn Ziyad. The betrayal commenced with a critical test. In late 710, a small scouting force of approximately 400 men and 100 horses successfully crossed the strait on Julian's ships, making landfall at a place now known as Tarifa. They raided, they burned, and they returned laden with rich spoils and tantalizing stories of a land overflowing with olive oil, wheat, and wine, defended by a disorganized and seemingly apathetic local militia. This crucial test confirmed everything Julian had so confidently promised. The formidable Visigothic giant possessed feet of brittle clay. The wild donkeys were not yet a factor in the narrative. The only animals that truly mattered now were the thousands of horses being meticulously loaded onto the boats in the spring of 711. The great invasion was prepared with terrifying, meticulous efficiency. Tariq ibn Ziyad, a seasoned Berber commander with eyes that had seen the endless deserts of the Maghreb and the towering mountains of the Atlas, assembled a formidable force of 7,000 men. It wasn't a massive army by the grand standards of the East, but it was a spear tip honed to a razor's edge, utterly devastating in its precision. On a fateful night in late April, under the clandestine cover of a darkness that seemed complicit in the act, the invasion fleet launched. Imagine yourself standing on the deck of one of those ships for a moment, feel the powerful swell where the Atlantic meets the Mediterranean, hear the rhythmic creaking of the timber, the suppressed breathing of thousands of men and horses cramped below in the hold. There is, unequivocally, no turning back. The water hisses against the hull, ominously whispering the end of an entire era. Count Julian's experienced sailors, men who knew these treacherous waters by heart, guided the very enemy of their faith toward the vulnerable shores of their own homeland. It is a moment of profound cognitive dissonance. As the imposing limestone massif of Gibraltar, then known as Mons Calpe, loomed majestically out of the morning mist like a crouching lion, the history of Spain held its breath. Tariq stepped onto the beach near that colossal rock that would forever bear his name, Jabal Tariq, the mountain of Tariq, now Gibraltar. Legend has it that upon landing, Tariq ordered his own ships to be burned, famously telling his men, "Behind you is the sea. Before you is the enemy. You have no escape but in your valor." While scholars continue to debate the literal truth of the burning ships, the spiritual truth of that commitment is undeniably powerful. They were utterly committed, there was no conceivable retreat. And where, amidst all this, was King Roderick? While the invasion force was meticulously unloading its horses and sharpening its formidable scimitars on the beach, he was hundreds of miles away in the north, laying siege to the city of Pamplona, actively fighting the Basques, completely oblivious that the very door to his kingdom had been violently kicked open. The tragedy of the Visigoths was a devastating tragedy of timing. The warning beacons, if they were indeed lit, were either not seen or the messengers were simply too slow. By the time the dire news reached the king that a strange new people had landed in the south, Tarik had already firmly secured his bridgehead. The countryside, crucially, did not rise up in unified defense to hurl the invaders back into the sea. Instead, the local population, utterly exhausted by years of famine and the crushing exactions of the Visigothic nobility, merely watched with a passive, detached curiosity. Julian's revenge was unfolding more perfectly than he could ever have dreamed. He had not merely allowed a raiding party to enter, he had introduced a new, formidable gravity to the entire peninsula. The chaotic, feudal gravity of the Goths was now being fundamentally challenged by the unified, zealous gravity of the Umayyad expansion. As Tarik's army began its relentless move inland, sweeping through the picturesque white villages and along the dusty roads of Andalusia, the terrifying countdown to the Guadalete truly began. The gatekeeper had accomplished his task. The straits were wide open. And as the smoke from the invaders' encampments spiraled into the clear Spanish sky, the ancient Roman province of Hispania began to slowly suffocate, tragically unaware that it was already in its death throes. The silence of the night is now dramatically replaced by the haunting call to prayer, the adhan, rising for the very first time over the sacred Iberian soil, a sound that would resonate and echo here for nearly 8 centuries. The prelude is over. The cataclysmic collision is now imminent. The oppressive heat of July in Andalusia feels like a physical weight, a heavy, suffocating blanket that presses down relentlessly on the shoulders of men and horses alike, blurring the distant horizon in a shimmering haze of distortion. It is into this sweltering furnace that King Roderick plunges, utterly exhausted, covered in dust, and profoundly desperate. He has furiously raced south from Pamplona, driving his army across the rugged spine of Spain in a grueling forced march that has left his legions gaunt and his cavalry stumbling from fatigue. Close your eyes and truly feel the overwhelming oppression of that summer air. It carries the distinct smells of dry grass, of sweat, and the sharp, impending, ozone-like scent of imminent violence. It is July 19, 711 AD. The opposing armies are gathering near a river that history has since immortalized as the Guadalete, though historians continue to debate whether the climactic clash actually occurred there or further south, near the Laguna de la Janda, a muddy lagoon that might have critically bogged down the heavy Visigothic cavalry. But the precise name of the river matters far less than the torrent of blood that is about to flow into it. Roderick has amassed a massive host, perhaps as many as 30,000 men, a number that, on paper, should have been more than sufficient to decisively crush the invader Tarik, who commands roughly 7,000 to 12,000 troops, even after receiving reinforcements. Superficially, the Visigothic king holds every advantage. He possesses superior numbers, he has heavy, formidable armor, and he is fighting on his own familiar home soil. But an army is far more than just a list of numbers. It is a complex, interconnected nervous system. And Roderick's army is suffering from a fatally paralyzed disconnect. As the camps are struck and the battle lines meticulously form in the hazy dawn, we must examine the configuration of the Visigothic line with extreme scrutiny. In the very center stands Roderick himself, resplendent in his royal regalia, surrounded by his loyal personal guard, the Fideles. But on the critical wings, commanding the left and right flanks, sit the brothers of the late King Witiza, Cis, Bert, and Appa. They are present by feudal obligation, but their hearts are brimming with treacherous intent. They have brought their own levies, thousands of men who look to them, not to the king, for orders. In the tense days leading up to this fateful moment, secret messages have flown clandestinely between these wings and the camp of Tarik ibn Ziyad. A terrible deal has been struck. The brothers have no intention of fighting for the man who ruthlessly stole their inheritance. Instead, they intend to subtly step aside. They believe, with a tragic naivete that eerily echoes through the centuries, that the Muslims are merely opportunistic raiders, mercenaries who will simply kill Roderick, seize some plunder, and then dutifully return to Africa, leaving the throne conveniently vacant for the House of Witiza to reclaim. They view this upcoming battle not as a desperate war for civilization itself, but as a strategically convenient assassination plot. They are about to discover, to their eternal horror, that they are unlocking a door they will never, ever be able to close again. The battle commences not with a single dramatic charge, but with a series of probing skirmishes, a tense testing of nerves that extends for nearly 2 full days. The sweltering air is filled with the incessant buzzing of flies and the ominous whistling of slingshots. But then, on the decisive day, the meticulously laid trap springs. Roderick confidently orders the grand advance. You can almost hear the thunderous pounding of hooves, the clattering of the heavy mail coats, the desperate shouts of "God help us!" rising from the center of the Visigothic line. The Visigothic heavy cavalry is a truly terrifying force, a formidable wall of iron designed to smash through enemy infantry lines with overwhelming force. They charge directly toward Tariq's center, fully expecting the wings of their own army to provide crucial support, to envelop the smaller enemy force in a deadly, crushing embrace. But that vital embrace never materializes. At the critical moment when the lines violently clash and metal screams against metal, the wings of the Visigothic army do not charge. They stand eerily still, and then slowly, deliberately, they begin to turn away. Appa and Sisbert signal their men to disengage, effectively opening the flanks of the royal army like a rib cage being brutally cracked open. Roderick is left shockingly exposed, utterly naked to the enemy on both sides. The confusion in the center is absolute, paralyzing. Men look frantically to their left and right, expecting stalwart support, and see only the retreating backs of their comrades, or, even worse, men standing by with arms chillingly folded. The powerful momentum of the charge instantly dissolves into rampant panic. The Umayyad forces, immediately recognizing the betrayal, surge forward with a renewed, ferocious intensity. The Berber light cavalry, swift and agile on their smaller horses, swarm around the heavy, lumbering Goths like a horde of venomous wasps attacking a slow beetle. The battlefield rapidly transforms into a horrific slaughterhouse. The fog of war here is literal. The immense dust kicked up by thousands of panicked horses creates a blinding, suffocating cloud in which friend cannot be distinguished from foe, and the only undeniable certainty is death. Roderick fights with the desperate fury of a man who suddenly comprehends that he has been utterly sold out. He is no longer fighting for victory. He is fighting for a shred of dignity that is rapidly evaporating in the suffocating heat. The cohesion of the Visigothic state shatters completely within a single, brutal hour. The nobility, the very flower of the Goths, are ruthlessly cut down in the mud, their proud genealogies ending abruptly in a crimson pool. The psychological shock of this profound betrayal proves even more devastating than the physical defeat. The Visigothic soldiers who were not privy to the plot see their leaders abandoning them, and immediately assume the war is already irrevocably lost. The retreat rapidly devolves into a desperate rout. Men frantically throw away their shields to run faster. They shed their heavy armor, leaving a grim trail of discarded steel leading back to the north. The river itself becomes a watery graveyard. Panicked horses plunge headlong into the water, trampling and drowning men. The river water turns opaque with silt and blood, carrying the bodies of dukes and counts downstream toward the sea they ultimately failed to defend. And somewhere in this utter chaos, Roderick simply disappears. We return now to the stark image of the empty saddle, the magnificent white horse Aurelia running wild, the golden boots left behind. His body is never definitively identified, perhaps because he was stripped of his royal insignia by looters, or perhaps because the relentless river simply claimed him entirely. But the king is dead. And with him dies the central nervous system of the entire kingdom. The conspirators, Appa and Sisbert, watch the ensuing carnage, perhaps foolishly expecting Tariq to bow to them and dutifully hand over the keys to Toledo. Instead, they find themselves staring into the steely eyes of a conqueror who has absolutely no intention of leaving. They hadn't merely hired a hitman, they had, unwittingly, invited a landlord. The Umayyads quickly realize that all effective resistance has completely evaporated. There is no backup army, no reserve force. The Visigothic kingdom was, in truth, a hollow shell, and it has been utterly crushed. As the sun sets on the Guadalete, the silence returns, but it is now the chilling silence of a graveyard. Birds of prey begin to circle ominously in the cooling air. The survivors scatter into the encroaching twilight, running north, always north, carrying the devastating news that the king is gone and the people of the book are coming. The road to the capital is now wide open. There is absolutely nothing standing between Tariq and the vast treasury of Toledo but open road and terrified peasants. The river flows on, ceaselessly, utterly indifferent to the dramatic change of masters. It washes away the blood, but it cannot, and will not, wash away the profound consequences. The Visigothic era, which had its origins with the sack of Rome, ends here in a muddy field in Andalusia, tragically betrayed by its own princes. The map of Europe has been folded and put away. A new, terrifying map is being drawn by the pale light of the moon. And far to the north, in the cool, damp shadows of the imposing mountains, the dire news has not yet arrived. The peaks of the Picos de Europa stand silent, stoic, waiting for the refugees who will soon come stumbling into their hidden valleys, bringing with them the somber story of the river of forgotten kings. The catastrophe is complete. The resurrection, however, is yet to come. The dust of the battlefield has long since settled, replaced by the fine golden dust of new construction and the sweet, lingering smoke of incense. We now move forward in time, slipping through the years like water through fingers, arriving in the vibrant city of Córdoba in the year 717 AD. The silence here is distinctly different. It is not the haunting silence of the dead at Guadalete, but rather the quiet, terrified obedience of the living. Close your eyes and imagine walking through the bustling streets of this ancient city, which is rapidly shedding its Roman skin and growing a new, exotic, Islamic shell. The air is redolent with the scents of strange new spices, saffron, cumin, and the sweet smoke of oud wood drifting from the courtyards of the new masters. The Christian church bells still ring, but they are now frequently punctuated by the haunting adhan, the Muslim call to prayer, rising from the minarets that are beginning to conspicuously pierce the skyline. In the very center of this transforming world, walking the cool marble corridors of the governor's palace, is a man who moves like a ghost. He wears the fine silk tunics of a courtier, but his hands are noticeably calloused from the sword hilt he is no longer permitted to carry. This is Pelagius. He is not in chains, there are no iron bars on his window. He is a prisoner of a much more subtle and dangerously insidious design. He is a hostage of the state, a domesticated nobleman kept in a gilded cage to ensure the good behavior of his people. The Umayyad conquest of Spain was not merely a military tsunami, it was a masterclass in sophisticated administrative absorption. Within a few short years of the disaster at the river, the Muslims had swept across the entire peninsula, seizing Toledo, Zaragoza, and pressing deep into the north. But their objective was not to burn the country down, they sought to tax it. To achieve this, they critically needed the cooperation of the old ruling class. And so, men like Pelagius, survivors of the royal bodyguard, high-ranking aristocrats with lingering blood ties to the vanished crown, were brought to Córdoba, not to die, but to be effectively neutralized by comfort and integration. Pelagius glides through the palace like a shadow. He watches intently. He listens acutely. He is, in essence, a spy operating in the very heart of the enemy, though the enemy naively believes he is merely a broken, compliant pet. He observes the staggering efficiency of the Umayyad administrative machine. Unlike the chaotic, feuding Visigothic court where power was a ruthless knife fight in the dark, the new administration is governed by the sophisticated, centralized bureaucracy of distant Damascus. He sees the swift runners arriving with dispatches from the Caliphate, thousands of miles away. He sees the brilliant engineers drawing meticulous plans for innovative irrigation systems that will transform the dry plains into flourishing gardens. He sees the revered scholars passionately debating Aristotle and charting the stars. It is a humiliation far deeper than mere defeat. It is the agonizing realization that the conquerors are not merely stronger, but are, in many profound ways, more inherently advanced. To the Umayyad governors, the Visigoths are perceived as barbarians who desperately need to be civilized. They treat Pelagius with a condescending politeness, offering him dates and wine, though they do not partake themselves, asking him about hunting in the north, treating him as an intriguing curiosity. They refer to the Christians as Dimmis, the protected people, allowing them to retain their religion in exchange for the jizya tax. It is a cunning system ingeniously designed to kill resistance with kindness and economic incentives. Why fight, indeed, when you can live in peace, make money, and simply pay a manageable tax? Many of Pelagius' former peers have already eagerly accepted this tempting bargain. He sees them in the bustling marketplace, now dressed in Arab robes, speaking a broken version of the conqueror's tongue, their spines noticeably softened by the seductive ease of collaboration. They have forgotten the golden boots in the mud. They have forgotten their king. But Pelagius has not forgotten. Every night, he stands on the balcony of his quarters, gazing intently northward. The city of Córdoba is rapidly becoming a city of lights, both literally and metaphorically. Its streets are paved and brilliantly illuminated at night, a marvel virtually unknown in the rest of Europe, which is steadily sinking into the gloom of the Dark Ages. But to Pelagius, these dazzling lights are nothing less than the fires of a gilded prison. He feels the slow atrophy of his sword arm. He knows that every day he spends here, consuming their food and walking their grand halls, he becomes increasingly complicit in the gradual erasure of his own cherished culture. Historians still debate whether Pelagius was actually related to King Roderick. Some claim he was a cousin or nephew, while others suggest he was merely a high-ranking officer of the royal guard. But in the grand sweep of the narrative, his precise bloodline matters far less than his unwavering memory. He embodies the living memory of the kingdom. He is the hard, unyielding kernel of the nut that defiantly refuses to be crushed while the rest of Spain slowly dissolves into the new province of Al-Andalus. Pelagius clings fiercely to a cold, hard knot of rage in his chest. He is patiently waiting for a mistake. He is waiting for the velvet glove of tolerance to slip, finally revealing the iron fist of oppression underneath. And the mistake, as it invariably does in the narratives of empires, stems from profound arrogance. The governor of the northern territories, a man named Munuza, personifies this very arrogance. Munuza is not based in Córdoba. He rules from the city of Gijón on the northern coast, but his influence permeates down to the capital. He is a man utterly convinced that the conquest is absolute, that the Gothic spirit is definitively dead and buried. He views the Visigoths not merely as subjects, but as personal property, and his gaze now falls upon Pelagius' family. The unsettling details filter through the grapevine of the court, whispered by sympathetic servants or delivered via encoded messages. Munuza has taken a keen interest in Pelagius' sister. This is not a request for a political marriage of equals. It is a brazen demand, a seizure of a woman as if she were a mere piece of land to be annexed. This is the spark. The political swiftly becomes deeply personal. The domesticated hostage suddenly realizes that there is no true safety in submission. The golden cage, for all its comforts, is still undeniably a cage. And now, the keeper is reaching inside to take precisely what he desires. Pelagius understands, with chilling clarity, that the survival of his people cannot be purchased with taxes or with silence. It can only be bought with blood. The sophistication of Córdoba, the architectural beauty of the mosques, the apparent order of the laws, it all crumbles away, revealing the raw, brutal reality of occupation. He is a stranger in his own homeland. The lights of the city blur into a haze of white-hot fury. He knows he cannot possibly fight them here. Córdoba is too strong, too densely populated with soldiers, too far removed from the wild places where a man might conceivably stand a chance against an empire. He needs terrain. He needs the mountains. His escape is not a sudden explosion of overt violence, but a quiet, calculated disappearance. It demands the cunning and stealth of a seasoned thief. Pelagius must shed his identity as a courtier. He must abandon the silks and the soft bed. He must, quite literally, become a nobody. Imagine him in the pre-dawn hours of a morning in 717 AD. The city lies asleep, save for the vigilant watchmen on the walls and the bakers stoking their ovens. The call to prayer has not yet sounded. The Guadalquivir River flows silently past the palace walls, the very same water that flows from the distant north. Pelagius slips out of a side gate, perhaps by bribing a guard, perhaps by climbing a wall. The legends are silent on the precise method, only on the indisputable result. He is gone. He moves with swift urgency, stealing a horse and riding hard before the rising sun can betray his absence. He is heading for the desert of the Duero, the vast, empty, depopulated buffer zone that starkly separates the settled south from the wild, untamed north. He is riding toward the Picos de Europa, the peaks of Europe, those majestic limestone teeth that fiercely bite the sky. He is going home, but not back to a grand castle. He is returning to the mud, to the caves, to the relentless rain. As he rides away from the dazzling city of lights, leaving the deceptive comfort of the new civilization behind, he is making a choice that would seem utterly insane to any rational observer. He is trading a life of relative luxury for a life of probable starvation. He is trading peace for a war he cannot possibly win. But as the towering walls of Córdoba fade into the distance, Pelagius breathes the first truly free air he has tasted in 6 long years. He is no longer a hostage. He is a rebel, and he carries within him the fierce ember of a fire that will burn for 7 centuries. The camera tracks him, a solitary figure on a stolen horse, galloping across the dry plains of La Mancha, a tiny speck against the overwhelming vastness of the occupied world, heading purposefully toward the storm clouds gathering ominously over the mountains. The chase is about to begin. The air noticeably shifts first as Pelagius drives his horse northward, leaving the verdant olive groves and the warm, dusty plains of the Meseta far behind. The sky itself begins to lower, pressing down onto the earth. The relentless sun of the south is replaced by a heavy ceiling of slate-gray clouds that cling to the hilltops like wet wool. He is traversing the desert of the Duero, a vast, depopulated no-man's land deliberately left empty by the constant raids and counter-raids of the previous century, a stark scar on the map that now serves as his only shield. Close your eyes and truly feel the sharp drop in temperature. The wind here bites with a damp chill, carrying the distinct scent of wet stone, pungent pine resin, and decaying leaves. It is the very scent of the Atlantic, the chilling scent of the end of the world as it was known. Pelagius is no longer the silk-clad hostage of Córdoba. He is a desperate fugitive, a mere speck of desperation, moving against a landscape that grows progressively more hostile with every passing mile. He is utterly exhausted, his body aching from days of hard riding, sleeping in ditches, drinking from muddy streams, always listening intently for the thunder of hooves behind him. For the Umayyad cavalry is not far behind. Munuza, the governor of the north, has been alerted. The wild beast has escaped its cage, and the hunt is now fiercely on. But as the ground begins to rise, tilting sharply upward into the rugged foothills of the Cantabrian mountains, the very geometry of the world dramatically shifts in Pelagius' favor. The flat, open terrain that so favored the swift Arab horses and the coordinated maneuvers of the imperial army gives way to a chaotic jumble of deep ravines, thick, ancient forests of oak and beech, and narrow, twisting goat paths. Here, the map ceases to make any sense to an outsider. The Picos de Europa rise majestically ahead like a fortress built by titans, a formidable wall of limestone teeth jutting thousands of feet into the swirling mist. These mountains are not merely tall, they are a geological weapon. They are karst formations riddled with treacherous potholes, sudden, sheer drops, and a bewildering labyrinth of caves carved by relentless water over millions of years. To the invader, this alien landscape is a nightmarish realm of claustrophobia and vertical ambushes. To Pelagius, it is the only armor he has left. He abandons his exhausted horse when the path becomes too steep, continuing on foot, clawing his way up the scree slopes, his worn boots slipping precariously on the wet slate. He is shedding the last vestiges of his nobility, becoming, by necessity, a creature of the rugged rock. The pursuit inevitably slows. The Umayyad patrols, accustomed to the expansive open spaces of the desert and the plains, hesitate at the mouth of these dark, dripping valleys. They gaze up at the peaks, perpetually shrouded in fog, and instinctively perceive a deadly trap. They turn back, falsely confident that the harsh cold and the hungry wolves of the wilderness will finish what they started. They report back to Menuza that the fugitive has simply vanished into the clouds, gone to die in a desolate wilderness where no civilized man could possibly survive. But Pelagius does not die. He climbs relentlessly until he reaches the very heart of the massif, a place where the silence is absolute, broken only by the rhythmic sound of water dripping from stalactites and the piercing cry of the golden eagle. It is here, in the imposing shadow of Mount Oziva, that he finds them. They are not an army, they are the shattered wreckage of a nation. Hidden deep within the valleys, huddled in the mouths of caves like the Cueva de Santa Maria, are the survivors. They are a ragtag collection of desperate refugees, terrified peasants who fled their burning villages, fiercely independent local Asturian mountaineers who have never bowed to any king, Visigothic soldiers who shed their armor to run faster, and priests diligently guarding the few sacred relics they managed to save from the widespread looting. They are starving, shivering, and profoundly broken. They look at Pelagius with hollow, despairing eyes, expecting merely another mouth to feed, another desperate soul to mourn. But Pelagius looks back at them and perceives something entirely different. He sees the raw, unrefined material of burgeoning resistance. He stands before them, not as a beggar, but as a resolute remnant of the old legitimacy. He carries the dignified bearing of the Toledo court, the hardened steel of the royal guard, and the unquenchable fire of a man who has witnessed the enemy up close and intimately knows they can be bled. He speaks to them, his voice echoing powerfully off the limestone walls. He recounts the weaknesses he observed in Córdoba, the crippling overconfidence, the dangerous reliance on collaborators, the inherent fragility of a rule built purely on fear. He tells them that these very mountains are their impregnable walls, the deep gorges their unassailable moats, and the labyrinthine caves their impenetrable castles. Historians still debate whether Pelagius was formally elected king immediately upon his arrival in a traditional Visigothic ceremony, raised on a shield amidst the clashing of swords, or if his leadership was a slower, more organic evolution born purely of necessity. But the emotional truth remains, in the damp gloom of that mountain hideout, a profound coronation of the spirit unquestionably took place. The refugees ceased being passive victims and began to transform into defiant rebels. For 4 arduous years, from 718 to 722, they lived precariously on the very edge of existence. They subsisted on honey scavenged from the rocks, wild game, and whatever meager crops they could cultivate on the steep, unforgiving terraces. They launched daring raids on Umayyad outposts for desperately needed weapons, striking in the dead of night and vanishing before the dawn like elusive ghosts. They became an integral part of the landscape itself, meticulously learning every cave mouth, every hidden spring, every loose rock that could be dislodged onto a path below. Pelagius drilled them relentlessly. He taught the peasant how to effectively hold a spear, the priest how to bandage a wound, and the fierce mountain clansman how to fight in formation. He forged a unity that had never existed in the decadent, fractured court of Toledo. There was no gold here to steal, no power to envy. There was only the shared, burning will to survive. The kingdom of Asturias, at this nascent stage, was nothing more than a few hundred shivering people huddled in a cave, a microscopic speck of defiance on a map entirely painted in the dominant color of the Caliphate. To the complacent governors in the south, they were utterly irrelevant, merely 30 wild donkeys, praying in the vast wilderness. But in the quiet, nurturing silence of the Picos, that donkey was steadily growing teeth. The mist that so effectively hid them also inadvertently incubated them. The relentless harshness of the terrain ruthlessly weeded out the weak and hardened the survivors into a formidable force that could endure anything. They were patiently waiting. They knew the Empire would not ignore them forever. They knew that sooner or later, the formidable sword of Islam would inevitably come looking for the infection in the north. And when that fateful day arrived, Pelagius determined that the mountains would not merely hide them. The mountains would, in fact, fight for them. He chose his ground with meticulous care. He discovered a specific cave, precariously perched high above a narrow, densely wooded gorge where two rivers converged. It was a place where sheer numbers would mean absolutely nothing, and unwavering faith would mean everything. He named it his Alamo, his Thermopylae. He named it Covadonga. The stage was now meticulously set. The fugitives were finally ready to stop running. The ghosts were ready to become flesh and iron once more. We leave the dripping limestone caves for a moment to stand in the warm, perfumed air of the conqueror's bustling headquarters. It is the spring of 722 AD. We are in the city of Gijón on the northern coast of Asturias, where the formidable Governor Menuza holds court. The atmosphere here is one of absolute, suffocating confidence. To truly grasp the mindset of the men gathered around the map tables, you must zoom out. Pull the camera back until you encompass the entire known world. The Umayyad Caliphate is not merely a kingdom, it is a global superpower, a colossal empire that straddles the earth from the distant banks of the Indus River in India to the powerful waves of the Atlantic Ocean. It is, by far, the largest empire the world has ever witnessed, eclipsing even Rome in its breathtaking speed of expansion. Its formidable armies have shattered the Persians, the Byzantines, and the Visigoths with unparalleled ease. Its poets are crafting verses in distant Damascus, its scientists are meticulously calculating the circumference of the earth, its merchants are engaged in lucrative trades spanning silk and spices across vast distances. Against this overwhelming backdrop of seemingly limitless power, the report lying on Menuza's desk appears almost like a cruel joke. It speaks of a minor disturbance in the Picos de Europa. It speaks of a mere handful of starving men led by a runaway hostage, purportedly hiding in the mist like frightened animals. To Menuza and to the visiting general, Alcama, who has arrived from Córdoba to inspect the province, this is not a genuine rebellion. It is a trivial nuisance. It is, at most, a few bandits stealing goats. The chroniclers of the time meticulously preserved the very words that, in hindsight, sealed the tragic fate of the empire in the West. As the report was read, meticulously detailing the positions of Pelagius' ragtag band, a dismissive wave of the hand accompanied the now infamous question. "What are 30 wild donkeys? What damage can they possibly do to us?" The phrase, "wild donkeys," was not just a casual insult, it was a deliberate classification. It effectively stripped the rebels of their humanity, their nobility, and any perceived threat. It reduced them to mere beasts, stubborn, stupid, and ultimately irrelevant. In the cold, hard mathematics of the Caliphate, 30 men pitted against an empire of millions was an equation that unequivocally equaled zero. The arrogance displayed was not merely personal, it was deeply structural. It was the inherent blindness of a giant that cannot even perceive the tiny insect poised to deliver a painful sting to its heel. Historians still engage in vigorous debate over whether the number 30 was a literal head count of Pelagius' remaining forces after years of brutal skirmishes and starvation, or a symbolic figure of speech purposefully used by the chroniclers to emphasize the divine disparity between the two opposing sides. But the underlying logic within the command tent was undeniably clear. This was a mere mop-up operation. It was a police action, swiftly designed to flush out a few troublesome criminals, summarily cut off their heads, and then prominently mount them on the gates of Gijón as a stark reminder that the reach of the Caliph was, indeed, infinite. General Alcama is entrusted with this task. He is a soldier of the old school, a seasoned veteran who has undoubtedly witnessed the dust of countless battlefields. He harbors no fear of these wild donkeys. He assembles an expeditionary force that, by any reasonable standard, constitutes extreme overkill. While medieval chronicles often inflate the numbers to hundreds of thousands to heighten the miraculous nature of the event, modern estimates suggest a force of perhaps 8,000 to 20,000 men. Even at the lowest estimate, it represents a crushing hammer blow aimed at a mere mosquito. The army that gathers on the coastal plain is a truly terrifying display of military evolution. It includes heavy Arab cavalry, meticulously protected by chain mail and wielding long lances, fierce and agile Berber infantry, who are themselves accomplished mountaineers, and a formidable contingent of slingers and archers capable of darkening the very sky with their projectiles. They are disciplined, exceptionally well-fed, and propelled by the irresistible momentum of a century of unbroken victories. Riding with them, ensconced in a comfortable carriage of velvet and polished wood, is a man we have encountered before, Bishop Appa, the brother of the late King Watiza, the notorious collaborator, the man who faithfully helped open the door at the Guadalete. He is there not to fight, but to talk. He is presented as the voice of reason, the diplomatic tool Menuza hopes will persuade Pelayo to surrender without any bloodshed. After all, why needlessly waste valuable arrows on what appears to be a clear suicide pact? Appa represents the vision of a new Spain, the pragmatic path of submission and uneasy survival. He genuinely believes he is going to save his countrymen from a pointless, bloody death. He does not yet realize that he is riding directly into a theological and military buzzsaw. The march begins. The column of soldiers stretches for miles, a glittering serpent of steel winding its way inland from the coast. Close your eyes and listen to the distinctive sounds of this army on the move, the rhythmic tread of thousands of boots, the jingling of harnesses, the guttural commands barked in Arabic, and the confident laughter of men who fully expect to be safely home before the harvest. They move with an initial ease through the rolling green hills and fertile river valleys. But as they approach the formidable Picos de Europa, the world around them begins to close in ominously. The sky narrows to a mere slit of gray between towering, oppressive cliffs. The well-worn road dissolves into a treacherous track. The mountains loom ahead, silent and brooding, their majestic peaks lost within the perpetual cloud layer. To these soldiers of the desert and the warm Mediterranean coast, this stark landscape is utterly alien and profoundly oppressive. It is a place of deep shadows where the sun struggles to reach the valley floor. The horses grow visibly nervous, their ears twitching instinctively at the sound of distant rockfalls. The air grows cold and damp, seeping inexorably into their very bones. The terrain ruthlessly channels them, funneling the mighty army into a single, predictable, and dangerously narrow path. They are, in essence, walking directly into the throat of the beast, but they trust implicitly in their overwhelming numbers. What, indeed, can a mere handful of men in a cave possibly do against a legion? Alcima pushes them relentlessly forward, impatient to conclude this rather inglorious chore. He completely ignores the glaring tactical nightmare presented by the terrain because he does not believe there will be an actual battle. He believes, with absolute certainty, that there will be either a swift surrender or a brutal massacre. He simply cannot conceive of a scenario where these donkeys might actually bite back. Any intelligence reports, if they existed at all, are fatally flawed. They do not inform him that these donkeys have painstakingly spent 4 years transforming this very valley into an inescapable kill box. They do not tell him that the mountains are not empty, they are watching. High above the winding column, on the invisible ridge lines shrouded in the swirling mist and hidden by the dense canopy of ancient oaks, unseen eyes are meticulously tracking every single step. The rebels are there, spectral ghosts in the gray, counting the enemy banners, precisely measuring the speed of the advance, whispering the vital news back to their cave. The trap is now perfectly set. The mouse has successfully lured the elephant into the ravine. As the vanguard of the Umayyad army rounds the final bend and beholds the holy cave of Covadonga, suspended like a swallow's nest on the sheer cliff face ahead, a profound hush falls over the ranks. It is a dead end. There is nowhere left to go but directly up into the formidable teeth of the rock. The general signals a halt. The bishop calmly adjusts his robes. The silence of the gorge is heavy, amplifying the powerful sound of the river rushing far below. It is the deep, collective breath before the scream. The wild donkeys are waiting. And the empire is about to learn the devastating price of its profound arrogance. The silence that now descends upon the gorge is not the silence of peace, it is the unsettling silence of a held breath. Thousands of soldiers stand on the valley floor, their horses shifting restlessly on the damp stones, while birds watch with silent anticipation from the dense canopy above. Everything pauses, suspended in this pivotal moment where words desperately attempt to do the brutal work of swords. From the disciplined ranks of the Umayyad army, a single figure slowly emerges. He is not clad in the gleaming steel of a warrior, but rather in the flowing, ornate robes of the church. This is Bishop Appa, the Metropolitan of Seville, a man carrying the immense weight of a shattered kingdom on his shoulders, though he bears it with a visibly bent spine. He rides a mule, the traditional mount of a peacemaker, carefully picking his way up the rocky path toward the mouth of the cave. The visual contrast is stark, the glittering gold of his ecclesiastical vestments against the gray, moss-lit limestone of the formidable cliff face. He stops just outside the effective range of an arrow shot, looking up into the formidable darkness of the cavern where Pelagius and his men are grimly watching. To the modern ear, this scene might feel like a dramatic cinematic invention, a scripted parley preceding the climax, but it is, in fact, a ritual deeply embedded in the warfare traditions of the time, the final, ceremonial offer of mercy before utter annihilation. Appa clears his throat. His voice, powerfully amplified by the natural acoustics of the amphitheater, echoes off the imposing rock walls, reaching every ear in the silent valley. He does not speak with hatred, instead, he speaks with a weary, tragic kindness. He calls out to Pelagius by name, addressing him as a friend, a peer, a fellow survivor of the recent shipwreck of their kingdom. Pelagius, he calls, his voice drifting through the mist. Why do you cling to this barren rock? The entire host of the Goths, with all their chariots and their brilliance, could not stand before the Ishmaelites. How, then, do you hope to defend yourself with a mere handful of starving men in a hole in the wall? It is a deeply seductive argument, the potent argument of stark reality. Appa represents the cold, hard logic of the visible world. He points to the map, to the recent history of the last 10 years, to the sheer mathematical impossibility of continued resistance. He offers Pelagius a future, a governorship, a luxurious villa, a life of comfort under the new order, precisely as Appa himself now enjoys. He pleads with him not to senselessly throw away his life for a definitively dead cause. Listen to me, he urges, his voice tinged with genuine concern. And you will enjoy many good things, and you will be partners with us in everything. The soldiers below wait with bated breath. The rebels in the cave grip their spears even tighter. It is a moment of supreme temptation. To surrender now would be entirely rational. It would undoubtedly save the lives of the women and children huddled in the back of the cave. It would bring an immediate end to the gnawing cold, the persistent hunger, and the constant, paralyzing fear. But Pelagius no longer lives in the realm of cold logic. He lives in the powerful, symbolic world of unwavering faith. He steps forward from the deep shadows of the cave entrance, his gaunt silhouette framed starkly against the dark interior. His armor is battered, his face weathered by the relentless mountain wind. He looks down at the bishop, the man who wears the sacred robes of God but speaks the pragmatic words of the conqueror. Historians still debate whether the exact dialogue recorded in the Chronicle of Alfonso III is a verbatim transcript or a later, theologically polished embellishment. But the essence of Pelagius' powerful reply represents the spiritual pivot point of the entire Reconquista. He does not engage in discussions about troop numbers or military tactics. He speaks, instead, about seeds. Have you not read in the Holy Scriptures? Pelagius calls back, his voice steady and hard as the granite around him, that the church of the Lord is like a grain of mustard seed, which, being the smallest of all seeds, grows to be greater than all? It is a stunning, irrefutable rebuke. He is using the bishop's own sacred text against him. He is reframing the narrative not as a military defeat, but as a period of essential biological dormancy. The seed, he implies, must be buried deep in the dirt, small and invisible, before it can rise majestically as a mighty tree. Pelagius gestures to the damp, dark cave around him. From this little mountain, he defiantly declares, the salvation of Spain will arise, and the army of the Goths will be restored. He utterly rejects the offer. He rejects the logic. He rejects the very notion of surrender. He tells Appa that his trust is not placed in earthly armies, but in the Christ who steadfastly advocates for the weak. Go back, he warns, his voice firm. Go back to those who sent you and tell them we will never, ever bow. The rejection hangs palpably in the cold air, absolute and irrevocably final. There is a long, heavy pause. Appa stares up at the man he most likely considers a madman. He sees, with grim finality, that no negotiation is possible here. The chasm between them is not merely vertical altitude, it is the insurmountable distance between two entirely different universes. The bishop slowly shakes his head, turning his mule around. He rides back down the treacherous slope, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The tragedy is sealed. He returns to General Alcima, who is waiting with an impatient, scowling expression. What did the wild donkey say? The general curtly asks. Appa sighs, his voice heavy with the crushing knowledge of what must inevitably come next. He is hard, the bishop reports, his tone resigned. He will not listen. There is nothing left but the sword. The mood in the valley shifts instantly and dramatically. The flimsy pretense of diplomacy evaporates completely. Alcima raises his hand, and the relentless machinery of war begins its terrifying grind. The archers and slingers step forward, expertly knocking arrows and loading stones. The vanguard of the infantry draws their fearsome scimitars. The sound of prayer rises from both sides, one in Arabic, praising the greatness of God, the other in Latin, desperately begging for his divine protection. But up in the cave, an eerie calm prevails. Pelagius turns to his men. He does not deliver a rousing speech about glory or heroism. He gives them simple, practical, life-saving instructions. He tells them to wait. He tells them to implicitly trust the rock. He tells them that the mountain itself is their shield, and crucially, that the enemy's overwhelming strength is also their inherent weakness. The 300 men, or however many they truly were, braced themselves firmly against the unyielding limestone walls. They can clearly see the formidable forest of spears moving below. They can see the whites of the eyes of the men coming to brutally kill them. But they also perceive something that Alcima does not. They see the treacherous narrowness of the path. They see the precipitous, steep angle of the cliff. They see the loose boulders piled high on the ridges above, precariously held back by timber supports, waiting patiently for the precise cut of a rope. The bishop has ridden away, carrying the last fragile hope of peace with him. The mustard seed has been planted deep in the dark earth of the cave. Now, it must be watered with blood. The first arrow flies, arching high into the gray sky, a tiny, dark scratch against the swirling mist, seeking the very heart of the rebellion. It is followed by another, and then 1,000 more, a darkening cloud of death rising ominously from the valley floor. The talking is over. The miracle is about to begin. The air in the gorge instantly transforms from a quiet mist into a screaming storm of iron and wood. General Alcima gives the command, a single, sharp shout that violently cuts through the damp air, and the sky above turns black with projectiles. Thousands of bowstrings snap in unison, creating a sound like a massive whip cracking against the mountain side. The Umayyad archers are renowned as the finest in the world, disciplined men who have rained death upon the armies of Persia and the garrisons of Byzantium. They do not miss. But here, in this treacherous, narrow throat of stone, the established rules of war are being dramatically rewritten by the very geometry of the earth itself. Observe the flight of the first volley. The arrows hiss upward, bravely fighting gravity, seeking the dark, yawning mouth of the cave where Pelagius and his men are huddled defiantly behind their shields. But the cave of Covadonga is no simple hole in a wall. It is a formidable geological overhang, a massive lip of limestone that protrudes like a protective brow over the sanctuary. The arrows, fired from the valley floor at a steep, almost vertical angle, do not fly deep into the cavern. Instead, they strike the stone ceiling of the overhang, and then something utterly unexpected occurs, something the chroniclers will later proclaim a miracle, but which a physicist would simply term a brutal lesson in ballistics. The arrows do not embed themselves in the stone, they shatter, or, even worse, they violently bounce. The kinetic energy of the entire volley is effectively rejected by the mountain itself. The arrows ricochet backward, spinning wildly, raining down not upon the rebels within the cave, but upon the upturned, terrified faces of the very men who fired them. It is a moment of horrific confusion. The front ranks of the Umayyad army, packed tightly in the narrow defile, suddenly find themselves under a devastating attack from their own weapons. Men scream in agony as shafts pierce shoulders and necks. The psychological impact is instantaneous and utterly devastating. To the superstitious mind of the medieval soldier, this is not mere physics. This is unmistakable divine intervention. It appears as if the sky itself has betrayed them, as if the very God they pray to, or perhaps the God of the Christians, is physically spitting their violence back at them. A ripple of unadulterated panic shudders through the entire column. The forward momentum of the charge falters, then collapses. Men cease looking at the enemy ahead and instead begin gazing at the treacherous stone above them with pure terror. Alchemist screams at them to hold the line, to fire again. But the insidious seed of doubt has already been firmly planted. The wild donkeys in the cave remain untouched. They are watching the unfolding chaos with a grim, resolute satisfaction, their knuckles wide on the shafts of their spears. Pelagius discerns the hesitation. He sees the confusion rippling through the enemy ranks like wine through a field of wheat. He knows, with absolute certainty, that this is the moment. The mustard seed is about to burst forth. He raises his sword, not a gilded, ceremonial blade, but a piece of sharpened iron that has seen too much hard use, and gives the signal. It is not a shout, for a shout would be utterly lost in the din. It is a precise movement, a forceful thrust of the blade toward the sky. High above the cave, on the invisible ridge lines shrouded in the persistent mist, the hidden Asturians see the glint of the steel. These are not professional soldiers. They are farmers, shepherds, men who instinctively know how to move earth and timber. For days they have been meticulously preparing for this second, crucial phase of the trap. They sever the ropes holding back the makeshift dams of logs and massive stones they have painstakingly piled on the cliffs. The sound that follows is far deeper than the whistling of arrows, a low, terrifying rumbling groan that vibrates deeply in the chest of every man in the valley. The mountain itself begins to move. Tons of massive limestone boulders, felled tree trunks, and accumulated debris come crashing down the vertical slopes of the gorge. It is an avalanche of pure, unadulterated hate. The rocks smash into the densely packed ranks of the Umayyad army with the devastating force of meteorites. There is absolutely no room to dodge. The narrow path, which had been the invaders' confident highway, instantly becomes their inescapable tomb. Men are crushed before they can even draw their swords. Horses panic, rearing wildly and trampling their own riders, driven mad by the deafening noise and agonizing pain. The traffic jam of flesh and steel is absolute, suffocating. The rear of the army is still relentlessly pushing forward, tragically unaware of the carnage at the front, compressing the mass of men into a suffocating crush where they can neither fight nor flee. And then, into this horrifying cauldron of dust and blood, Pelagius leads the charge. The 300 men surge forth from the cave mouth, screaming the name of Christ and the name of their lost kingdom. They hit the stunned, disorganized front line of the Umayyads like a sledgehammer striking glass. The overwhelming disparity in numbers no longer matters. In the tight, suffocating confines of the gorge, 1,000 men are no better than 3, if only 3 can effectively fight at a time. The long lances of the Arabs are utterly useless here. There is no room to couch them or swing them effectively. The fight devolves into a brutal brawl of knives, rocks, and sheer desperation. The Visigothic veterans, fighting with the unleashed fury of men who have lost absolutely everything and now have nothing left to lose, carve a bloody path through the elite guard. They are not fighting for mere territory. They are fighting for the fundamental right to exist. Pelagius is in the very thick of it, a whirlwind of calculated violence, cutting down anyone who stands between him and the general. Alchema, the man who arrogantly mocked them as donkeys, now finds himself trapped in a living nightmare. He desperately tries to rally his bodyguard, to create a defensive perimeter, but the chaos is too absolute, too overwhelming. The wild donkeys have, indeed, become ravenous wolves. The legendary invincibility of the Umayyad army, a formidable reputation built on decades of unbroken conquest across 3 continents, shatters completely in the mud of a damp Spanish valley. Alcima falls? Historians still debate whether he was killed by Pelagius' own hand in a moment of poetic justice, or if he was simply dragged down by the anonymous mob of furious mountaineers, his identity lost in the scrum. But his death sends a profound shockwave through the surviving forces. The head of the snake has been decisively cut off. The panic turns into a desperate, headlong rout. The army that had marched in with such unbridled arrogance now frantically tries to turn around, but the path is hopelessly blocked by their own dead and the overwhelming debris of the avalanche. The retreat is a horrifying spectacle of trampling and terrified scrambling. They abandon their weapons, their looted treasures, their proud banners. They run blindly, seeking any possible way out of the inescapable trap, scrambling up the steep, treacherous slopes, only to be mercilessly picked off by the Asturians waiting in ambush within the trees. Bishop Alpa is captured, dragged ignominiously from his mule, and thrown into chains, a living, breathing symbol of the failed collaboration. The Battle of Covadonga is, effectively, over, but the killing is not yet finished. The gorge falls silent once more, save for the agonized groans of the dying and the ceaseless rushing of the river, which is now running stark red, carrying the blood of the empire down to the sea. The miracle of the arrows has been followed by the even greater miracle of the sword. The impossible has, in fact, happened. The static map of the conquest has been decisively punctured. But for the fleeing survivors, the nightmare is far from over. They have escaped the cave, but they must now cross the formidable mountains to reach home. And the mountains are not yet done with them. The narrative of history has pivoted dramatically on a single hour of intense violence. The mustard seed has, against all odds, cracked open the stone. The survivors of the slaughter at the cave do not pause to mourn their dead, they run. Terror is an incredibly powerful fuel, and it propels the remnants of Alcima's army eastward, deeper into the treacherous labyrinth of the Picos de Europa, desperately seeking a path that leads away from the spear-wielding demons. They are no longer a cohesive military unit. They are a panicked, desperate herd, stripping off their heavy mail, discarding their helmets, leaving a grim trail of expensive debris that marks their frenzied flight through the high passes. They scramble over the unforgiving limestone ridges, bleeding, utterly exhausted, their throats parched, their eyes wide with the trauma of the miracle they had just witnessed. They falsely believe they have put significant distance between themselves and Pelagius. They believe the worst is definitively over. But the geography of Asturias is cruel, and the trap Pelagius set was not merely tactical, it was profoundly topographical. The fleeing column is ruthlessly funneled toward the Libana Valley, a deep, lush gash in the earth where the river Deva runs cold and fast. They reach a place called Cascaya. It is a narrow track carved precariously into the side of the mountain, with a sheer wall of rock on one side and a precipitous drop to the river on the other. It is late in the day, or perhaps the early hours of the next morning. Time has lost its meaning for these desperate men. The mist is heavy here, muffling the sound of their stumbling boots. They are still thousands strong, a potentially dangerous force, if only they could regroup. But their morale is utterly shattered. They crowd onto the narrow path, pushing and shoving, desperate to cross the treacherous ground and reach the open plains to the south. And then, the earth itself betrays them. The chronicles of the Christian monks describe it with the chilling clarity of divine judgment. The earth opened and swallowed them. Historians still debate whether it was a divinely timed earthquake, a massive landslide triggered by the vibrations of thousands of marching feet on unstable ground, or perhaps a sudden flash flood caused by a mountain storm that fatally undermined the path. But the geological reality of the Picos de Europa strongly supports the catastrophe. These mountains are dynamic, crumbling giants. As the bulk of the retreating army crowds onto the most fragile section of the slope, a sound begins, a deep, terrifying groan that seems to emanate from the very center of the planet. It is not the sharp crack of an arrow, but the dull, nauseating sound of structural failure. The birds fall silent. The horses stop, their nostrils flaring, sensing the seismic shift in the ground beneath their hooves even before the men do. And then the mountain moves. It is not a slide, it is a shearing. A massive section of the cliff face, critically destabilized by rain or sheer weight, detaches itself violently from the parent rock. Close your eyes and vividly imagine the sheer horror of that moment. The ground beneath them simply ceases to exist. Thousands of tons of rock, soil, and ancient trees slide violently downward, carrying the screaming men and horses with them like fragile toys swept off a table. The fall is terrifyingly long. The army is pulverized, ground brutally between the moving earth and the unyielding riverbed below. The Deva River, already swollen, is instantly dammed by the overwhelming debris and the myriad bodies, its water transforming into a churning soup of mud and blood. Those at the front of the column look back in horror to see their comrades vanish into a towering cloud of dust that rises hundreds of feet into the air. Those at the rear stop dead, staring in disbelief at the gaping void where the road once existed. The invincible army has been utterly erased. It was not defeated by a superior force of arms. It was, in a profound sense, digested by the landscape itself. The silence that follows the cataclysmic landslide at Cascaya is heavier than any silence that came before. It is the silence of total annihilation. There are no wounded crying out for help, for they are buried beneath 20 feet of scree. There is only the slowly settling dust and the sound of the river desperately struggling to find a new path around the massive obstruction. For the few stragglers who miraculously manage to avoid the slide, the message is chillingly clear: the land of Asturias utterly rejects them. This is not merely enemy territory, it is cursed ground. They scatter wildly into the wilderness, where they will be hunted down by the local villagers, armed with pitchforks and axes, finishing what the vengeful mountain began. The destruction of Alcama's expeditionary force is absolute. Of the thousands who marched into the mountains with such unbridled arrogance, almost none returned to Córdoba to recount the terrifying tale. The wild donkeys did not just bite, they lured the mighty lion onto a treacherous precipice and watched it fall into the abyss. Back in Gijón, Governor Menuza anxiously waits for news of the expected victory. Instead, he receives the chilling silence of the grave. When rumors finally reach him, whispered by terrified scouts or carried by the very wind, confirming that Alcama is dead, the bishop is captured, and the army is buried, pure panic seizes him. The arrogant confidence of the empire evaporates in a single, heart-stopping moment. Menuza realizes, with dawning horror, that he is now completely alone, deep in hostile territory with no army to protect him. The infection has not been cured, it has metastasized into a full-blown plague. He does not even attempt to hold the city. He hastily packs his gold, his household, and he flees. He escapes Gijón, desperately hoping to race south to the perceived safety of the Meseta before the devastating news can spread. But the news travels far faster than any horses. The countryside is now fully awake. The stunning victory at Covadonga has acted like a powerful signal fire, igniting the spirit of fierce resistance in every village and hamlet. The pervasive fear is gone. The peasants who once hid from Menuza's tax collectors now stand defiantly on the roads, scythes in hand, waiting for him. Menuza never makes it to safety. He is intercepted at a place called Olias, cut off, and killed. His body is left unceremoniously in the dirt, another golden boot abandoned in the mud of history. The north is free. In the valley of the Deva, the dust slowly settles over the mass grave at Cascaya. The river eventually breaks through the dam of bodies and rock, washing the grim evidence away toward the sea. But the memory of this cataclysmic event sears itself indelibly into the consciousness of the region. For the Christians, it is the unequivocal confirmation of their divine covenant. God fought for them. The mountains fought for them. The impossible survival of the mustard seed was protected by the very earth of Spain. For the Umayyads, it is a bewildering, terrifying check on their seemingly unstoppable expansion. It is the very first time the powerful wave of Islam has encountered a rock it cannot erode. They will write it off in their official histories, downplaying the skirmish, dismissively calling it a minor affair involving 30 donkeys. But they will never truly return to these formidable peaks. The psychological barrier has been irrevocably erected. The Picos de Europa have become a wall that stretches up to heaven itself. The survivors of Covadonga, standing on the heights and watching the dust clouds settle over Cascaya, know that the immediate danger has passed. They are tired. They are bloodied. But they are profoundly alive. And more importantly, they are no longer refugees. They are now the undisputed masters of the mountain. The camera pans slowly over the silent, broken landscape of the landslide, where the armor of the dead glints faintly through the settling dirt, and then moves back up through the clouds to the sacred cave where it all dramatically began. A new ceremony is about to take place, not a funeral, but a vibrant beginning. The rain returns to the valley of Covadonga, as it always does in Asturias. It is a soft, persistent drizzle that blurs the edges of the world, gently washing the blood from the stones and cooling the heated iron of the swords. The shouting has stopped. The raw adrenaline that fueled the miraculous charge and the terrifying pursuit has finally burned itself out, leaving behind a profound, aching exhaustion. Close your eyes and stand in the clearing near the cave entrance. The air smells of wet earth, ozone, and the metallic tang of hard-won victory. But the overwhelming sensation is one of profound smallness. The great imperial army is gone, buried in the gorge or scattered to the winds. And what remains is a small circle of men standing resolutely in the mud. They are battered, bleeding, their tunics torn, their beards matted with the grime of the fight. There is no gold here. There are no trumpets, no silk tapestries, no incense swinging in silver censers. Compared to the glittering coronation of Roderick in the grand basilicas of Toledo, this humble gathering looks like a meeting of beggars. Yet the air is thick with a gravity that Toledo never truly possessed. The men look at Pelayo not with the suspicious eyes of courtiers weighing a political bet, but with the fierce, burning devotion of men who have stared into the abyss and been miraculously pulled back by a single, unwavering hand. It is time to make it official. It is time to name the thing they have just, against all odds, created. The ceremony that follows is raw and ancient, stripping away the veneer of Romanized civilization to reveal the old, fundamental Germanic bones of the Visigothic culture. They do not search for a throne. There is no furniture here, only the rugged rocks of the Picos. Instead, 4 of the strongest warriors step forward. They lower their shields that are hacked and splintered from the morning's violence, and lock them together to form a sturdy platform. Pelayo steps onto this surface of wood and leather. It is unstable, shifting slightly under his weight, a perfect, poignant metaphor for the nascent kingdom he is about to inherit. The men heave, lifting him up, raising him high above their heads. This is the levatio, the raising on the shield, the oldest form of election the tribes knew before they ever even learned the word majesty. As Pelayo rises above the sea of upturned faces, he does not appear like a monarch of the known world. He wears no crown, perhaps only a simple circle of bronze or a wreath of oak leaves twisted together by a loyal soldier. His robe is a rough woolen cloak, heavy with the relentless rain. But as the cheers rise from the throats of the survivors, a ragged, guttural roar of Pelagius Rex! The transformation is complete. The hostage of Córdoba is dead. The king of Asturias is born. It is a coronation performed in the deepest shadows, carried out in the armpit of the world, utterly unnoticed by the great powers of the age. In distant Damascus, the caliph remains oblivious to this unfolding event. In Rome, the pope is entirely unaware. To the outside observer, this is a non-event, a minor tribal ritual in a forgotten wilderness. But the camera of history zooms in, recognizing that this is, in fact, the crucial pivot point. Historians still debate whether Pelayo viewed himself as the legitimate successor to the Visigothic kingdom of Toledo, a neo-Gothic restoration intended to reclaim the entire peninsula, or if he was merely a local warlord, a pragmatic leader of an indigenous Asturian resistance that had never truly accepted Visigothic rule in the first place, now simply borrowing the title for strategic legitimacy. The debate is academic. The overriding reality was, quite simply, survival. As Pelayo stands on the shields, gazing out over the misty valley, he knows that he is not ruling a sprawling nation. He is, in essence, ruling a lifeboat. His kingdom consists of a few dozen miles of vertical rock, dense forests, and terrified refugees. His treasury is the meager loot they have stripped from the Umayyad dead. His palace will not be the grand marble halls of the south, but the humble village of Cangis de Onis, a hamlet of stone huts by the river, where the bridge is made of wood and the wind blows freely through the walls. Yet there is a profound purity in this poverty. The insidious rot that destroyed Toledo, the intrigue, the betrayal, the crippling disconnect between the ruler and the ruled, is utterly absent here. There is no room for such decadence. In these unforgiving mountains, everyone bleeds the same color. The king eats the same hard bread as the spearman. The king sleeps on the same hard ground. The social contract has been rewritten by the harsh hand of necessity. This new kingdom is a stark democracy of the desperate, bound together by the absolute, visceral knowledge that if they ever let go of each other's hands, they will assuredly drown. As Pelagius steps down from the shields, his boots sinking into the wet grass, he feels the immense weight of the crown far more heavily than Roderick ever did. Roderick lost a kingdom that was merely given to him. Pelagius must painstakingly build one from scratch. He begins the arduous work immediately. There is no time for feasting or celebration. The victory at Covadonga was, indeed, a miracle. But miracles do not plant crops or build defensive walls. The defense must be solidified. The crucial passes must be diligently guarded. The news must be spread to the other valleys that a free flame is burning brightly in the north, calling the lost sheep home. We now watch the graceful transition of the seasons in this high, wild place. Winter arrives early in the Picos. The heavy snow seals the passes, effectively transforming the fledgling kingdom of Asturias into an island of white. This isolation proves to be a profound blessing. It grants the nascent seed precious time to firmly take root. While the Umayyads in the south are distracted by internal revolts in Africa and further ambitious campaigns into France, campaigns that will eventually lead to their own significant defeat at Tours a decade later, Pelagius' kingdom breathes. It grows. It is a slow, quiet growth, like moss gradually covering a stone. Families emerge from the caves and begin the arduous task of rebuilding the ruined hamlets. Church bells, silent for years, ring out again in the thin mountain air, their sacred sound echoing off the cliffs like a heartbeat returning to a stilled chest. Pelagius wisely marries his son, Favila, to a local chieftain's daughter. He marries his daughter, Ermesinda, to Alfonso, the son of a neighboring duke. He is meticulously knitting the fractured tribes together, utilizing marriage instead of swords to forge a resilient fabric that will not easily tear. He is actively creating the Asturleonese identity, a hard, stubborn culture defined primarily by its unwavering resistance. The atmosphere of these early years is one of perpetual, twilight vigilance. They live with one eye always turned south, constantly watching the horizon. They know the giant might awaken again, but the giant is wounded, and the psychological barrier of Covadonga holds firm. The story of the battle grows in the telling, evolving into a shield more potent than any stone wall. It whispers to the Christians in the south that resistance is, indeed, possible. It whispers to the Muslims that the north is, unequivocally, haunted. Pelagius rules for 15 years after the battle. These are years of quiet consolidation, of steadfastly holding the line. He does not launch a grand crusade to retake the south. He is too wise for such folly. He understands that his paramount task is simply to keep the candle lit, to cup his hands carefully around the fragile flame so that the relentless wind of history does not blow it out. As we walk through the muddy streets of Cangis de Onis in the twilight of his reign, we see a king who has grown old in armor. He sits on a simple wooden bench outside his modest hall, watching the Sella River flow past. He looks tired, but his eyes are clear and resolute. He has accomplished the impossible. He has transformed a kingdom's suicide into a nation's birth. The golden boots of Roderick are long gone, buried deep in the mud of the Guadalete, poignant symbols of a perished vanity. Pelagius' boots are covered in the dust of the mountains, worn and cracked, but they are standing firmly on free soil. The night settles over the mountains, peaceful and cold. The stars emerge, the very same stars that looked down on the disaster at the river, now gazing upon a new beginning. The lineage has been forged. The anchor has been dropped. The ship has stopped drifting. The longest war in human history has, indeed, begun. But the first and hardest battle, the battle for sheer survival, is won. The camera pulls back now, rising higher and higher until the Picos de Europa are merely faint wrinkles on the vast skin of the peninsula. We watch the seasons flicker like the pages of a book turning in the wind, blurring into decades and then centuries. Pelagius dies peacefully in his bed in 737 AD, a luxury rarely afforded to the Visigothic kings of old. He leaves behind not a sprawling empire, but a potency that has taken firm root in the unyielding rock. His son, Favila, rules briefly, tragically killed, as the legends say, by a bear, a stark reminder that the wilderness remains untamed. But then comes Alfonso I, the Catholic, Pelagius' son-in-law, who married his daughter, Ermesinda. It is Alfonso who takes the survival strategy of the cave and masterfully transforms it into a geopolitical weapon. He looks south from the mountains and recognizes the inherent danger of the open plains. He knows he cannot yet conquer the Muslims, but he can strategically starve them out. He launches a series of brutal, systematic raids into the Duero River Valley, depopulating the towns, burning the crops, and forcibly relocating the Christians back north into the protective embrace of the mountains. He thus creates the Desert of the Duero, a massive, empty buffer zone, scorched of all life, a physical barrier of nothingness that effectively separates the tiny Christian north from the vast Islamic south. It is a grim tactic born of profound weakness, but it proves remarkably effective. For nearly a century, the Umayyad armies possessed no logistical stepping stones from which to launch sustained attacks on Asturias. The kingdom is safe behind its formidable moat of silence. As we watch the timeline scroll forward, we clearly see the ripple effect of that single rainy afternoon at Covadonga expanding outward. It is a slow, grinding expansion. The Reconquista, as it will later come to be known, is not a unified military campaign. It is a fitful, messy, multi-generational struggle that endures for an astonishing 770 years. It is, unequivocally, the longest war in human history. It stops and starts, defined by fragile truces, shifting alliances, and moments where Christian kings frequently fight each other as often as they fight the Caliphate. Historians still fiercely debate whether the concept of the Reconquista was a conscious, deliberate project in the minds of men like Pelagius and Alfonso, a purposeful mission to restore the Visigothic monarchy, or if it was a later invention of nationalist historians looking backward, seeking to create a grand destiny that did not exist at the time. Did Pelagius truly dream of conquering Granada, or was he merely trying to keep his family, and his people, alive? The truth is most likely found in the sheer momentum. Whether planned or accidental, the very survival of Asturias created a distinct, undeniable gravity. From this tiny pocket of resistance, new kingdoms sprouted like resilient shoots from a stump: Leon, Castile, Navarre, Aragon, and Portugal. They relentlessly pushed the frontier south, mile by bloody mile, building formidable castles, castillos, that eventually gave the central region of Spain its enduring name. The thread of history that began with a few hundred defiant men in a cave leads directly to the defining moments of the modern world. Follow the line: without Covadonga, there is no kingdom of Asturias. Without Asturias, there is no Castile. Without Castile, there is no pivotal marriage of Ferdinand and Isabella in 1469. Without that crucial union, there is no final conquest of Granada in 1492, the year the last Muslim ruler, Boabdil, famously handed over the keys of the Alhambra and wept as he looked back at his lost paradise. And without that definitive victory in 1492, there is no royal patronage for a Genoese sailor named Christopher Columbus, waiting impatiently in the wings of the court, asking for ships to sail west to the fabled Indies. The entire colonial history of the Americas, the rise of the Spanish Empire, the global spread of the Spanish language, it all balances precariously on the tip of the spear that Pelagius held in the damp gloom of that gorge. If the arrows had not miraculously turned, if the mountain had not catastrophically collapsed, if the wild donkeys had been crushed as the arrogant general predicted, the map of the world today would be utterly unrecognizable. Europe might well have become an extension of the Maghreb, a western province of a vast caliphate stretching to the Atlantic, its history written in flowing Arabic script. The alternate timelines softly coast away into the ether, leaving us with the stark reality we know, a reality forged in the stubborn, unwavering refusal to surrender. Today, if you journey to Covadonga, the silence has, once again, returned. The gorge is no longer a place of raw violence, it is a sacred sanctuary. A magnificent pink basilica stands proudly on the ridge, a powerful monument to the enduring faith that held the line. But the true heart of the place remains the humble cave. You ascend the stairs carved directly into the rock, passing the waterfall that feeds the tranquil pool below. Inside the Cueva Santa, dimly lit by votive candles that flicker gently in the draught, is a simple tomb. It is small, unassuming, set into the side of the cavern wall. The inscription is modest. It holds the revered remains of the man who started it all. Pelagius lies here, precisely where he fought, eternally guarding the sacred pass. He is no longer merely the refugee or the rebel. He is the revered grandfather of a nation. The tourists who whisper reverently in the gloom, crossing themselves or simply staring in awe at the ancient rock, are standing, in essence, in the very womb of Spain. The water still drips steadily from the ceiling, maintaining the same rhythm that marked time during those desperate years of starvation. The mist still clings tenaciously to the peaks of the Picos de Europa, those limestone teeth that bit the empire. The story has, over time, become myth, but the rock itself is real. The legacy is not merely confined to the borders of a country, but profoundly embedded in the powerful idea that resistance, no matter how seemingly insignificant, can fundamentally change the physics of history. The mustard seed grew, the mountain remembers, and the wild donkeys, who bravely stood their ground, proved that even the smallest stone, if thrown with enough unwavering faith, can indeed bring down a giant. The war is over. The echoes have faded. The history book closes softly, leaving only the tranquil sound of the water falling into the pool, a lullaby that has been gently playing for 1300 years. And so, the camera stops moving. We are back in the quiet dark of your own room. The centuries have settled back into the dust. The armies have marched away, their shouting lost to the wind. The kings and caliphs, the generals and the traitors, have all gone to sleep in the earth. There is nothing left to fight for tonight. The map is drawn, the borders are still, and the story is safe. Let the image of the mist-covered mountains of Asturias linger gently in your mind, a place of cool, grey stone and verdant green forests, protected, hidden, and utterly secure. You are safe here. The incessant noise of the world cannot reach you in these high passes. Let your breathing slow down, gradually matching the rhythmic dripping of water in the cave. Drop by drop, moment by moment, the history is done. The past is a soft pillow. Drift away now into the quiet, into the mist, into the profound peace of the mountain that watches over you. Sweet dreams.